What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Cardinal Rule. In this video, I'm going to identify 5 players that I think are fighting for a roster spot going into the last preseason game. Now, obviously, this list doesn't include everyone who's trying to make the roster. The players I've identified are players that I think have a legitimate chance to make the team, but are currently, at least in my view, on the outside looking in. For each of these players, I'm going to briefly discuss their situation in terms of the roster and discuss who I think they're competing with for a spot on the team. The first player I'm going to discuss is tight end Ross Travis. Travis played really well in the preseason game against Kansas City, scoring a touchdown on a really nice throw from Chris Streveler. But I still think he's on the outside looking in, competing with Demetrius Harris. Harris is a more experienced player than Travis, and I think he still does have the edge on that competition for the third tight end spot. But if Travis could put together another solid game against New Orleans and have a good week of practice, I think there's a chance he could earn that third tight end spot. But with that all said, the person who wins that spot still might not be with the team for long. It wouldn't surprise me if the Cardinals end up signing someone who's cut by another team in the final cuts to the 53-man roster. The next player is offensive lineman Sean Harlow. Now, Harlow is a former 4th-round pick of the Atlanta Falcons, and he's played reasonably well during this preseason over a lot of snaps. I think the player that Harlow is actually competing against is Brian Winters, the free agent that the Cardinals brought in this offseason. Winters has yet to play during the preseason due to some health issues, and although he's still in the competition for the starting right guard position, if he struggles, I could see a scenario where Harlow actually ends up making the roster, someone like Josh Jones earns the starting right guard position, and Winters ends up getting cut. It's still an outside chance, but Harlow has played well, and if he continues to play well, there is a possibility he makes this roster. The next player is rookie Victor Dimick. Now, Dimick has played a lot of snaps, and he's been up and down in terms of his performance thus far in the preseason. Now, I think they'd like to keep him on the starting roster and not expose him to waivers, giving another team a chance to pick him up before they can actually get him on the practice squad. But the numbers game is going to make it really hard to find a spot for players like him on this roster, especially with Dennis Gardeck being activated from the physically unable to perform list. Now, I don't think there's a specific pass rusher that Dimick is competing against. I think the guys ahead of him on the roster are pretty well set. Chandler Jones, Marcus Golden, Devin Kennard, Dennis Gardeck. What I think he's actually up against in terms of trying to make the roster is convincing the Cardinals that he's a better use of a roster spot than a 10th offensive lineman, or a 4th running back, or a special teams ace like Ezekiel Turner. And ultimately, it just comes back to that numbers game where you can only get 53 players on this roster. The next player is Michael Dogby. The Cardinals drafted him in the 7th round in 2019, and he's been one of those sort of bubble players over the last couple of years. But he's played pretty well during the preseason. But with him, like Dimick, it becomes a numbers game. The defensive linemen ahead of him in the roster are pretty well set, and he's not really competing with those guys. Like Dimick, he's competing with a 10th offensive lineman, a 4th running back, a special teams ace, players at other positions against which he has to demonstrate that he's a better use of a roster spot than those players are. The last player I'm going to talk about who I think is fighting for a roster spot is safety Charles Washington. Washington has been a special teams ace for this team, and he is outstanding in that role. But that safety room is loaded with good special teams players, some of which who have more starting experience than Washington. So although he's really good in special teams, he's competing against a player like Sean Williams, who is also a good special teams player, though not necessarily at the same level as Washington, but also has experience starting at safety. And with some of the other special teams aces they've brought on, like James Wiggins and Marco Wilson, it might be hard for Washington to justify a roster spot if they have an abundance of players who can do what he does, but who can also start. So these are some of the players I'm going to be watching in the last preseason game to see if they make an impact and potentially earn a roster spot. Who are some of the players that you think are fighting for a roster spot? Let me know in the comments below. And also, please be sure to click like on this video. And if you're not already subscribed to the Cardinal Rule, please do subscribe. That really helps out the channel a lot. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Cardinal Rule.